Welcome home. We are WNST. Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively having an interesting home weekend this weekend. The Birds will be home all weekend. The Ravens are playing this weekend. Fake football on a Saturday, and Luke Jones will be around for both, all, or one or the other, whatever one matters. He's at Baltimore. Luke, you can find him next Friday with us giving away Maryland lottery tickets. We'll have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away. The Ravens scratch-offs are now out on the streets as well. Our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions have our water cleared up. I've even got some fresh water for the set here from Liberty Pure Solutions, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare. I can't give you the oil for your car. You have to go to Jiffy Lube and do that yourself. Luke Jones does that. He gets his way out to Owings Mills and then downtown. Birds 2 weeks away from home, come back home. Rogers making the start. It seems like everywhere you turn, Luke, you can point at someone that he acquired 2 weeks ago. Feels like they've been here for months, but they've been here less than 2 weeks. And for all of the new players, there's a little bit of a referendum on them, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's been much of the same for this entire ball club for going on close to 2 months now. And really over 2 months, depending on where you want to start, wherever you want to pinpoint the date, whether you want to say they're 28-28 since June 9th, whether you want to say they're 21-25 since the series in the Bronx when they blew out the Yankees on that, Thursday finale, and everyone thought they're going to the World Series at that point in time. They've been a sub 500 team since then. We're talking around a quarter of a season. So new guys come in. It's been some good. Sir Anthony Dominguez being at the top of the list there, but it's been a lot of not so good. And we saw that on display on Tuesday night. Orioles after an off day. Trevor Rogers didn't pitch well. Defense choppy as we've seen it be, and the offense not doing nearly enough. There's not a whole lot to say about this game. They were thoroughly outplayed. It was a complete loss, right? You can point to every phase, but
even Jim Palmer got his cheap shot in by saying there shouldn't be a stadium down there. And I'm like, okay, Jim, there you go. Jim got his, I don't like the Nationals, 20 years into this, but I'm like, the local part of this is never caught on, right? Like we're not mad we lost to the Nationals anymore and you're mad about losing to anybody else, but you don't play the Nationals too often and they kind of stink. And you think, who's this young guy getting all the hits?
Yeah, but at the same time, they're not the White Sox either, and the White Sox blew out the Yankees the other night. It's baseball, right? If you don't come to play, you're going to get your butt kicked. That's how this works, and we've seen the Orioles get their butt kicked a little bit more over the last month and a half than they should. I think in the eyes and minds of many fans and media, but at the same time, you look at the pitching staff, and I kind of just went through it. When you look at what their current rotation is, Corbin Burnes, Zach Eflin. We've talked a lot about Albert Suarez and the saving grace that he's been, but you have 2.5 starters that you trust, right? And Suarez, I don't say that to be disrespectful. It's just we've thought over and over he would eventually settle into the bullpen, and now he's your number 3 starter until Grayson Rodriguez comes back.
And doing it well.
He has, but Trevor Rogers not doing it well, and we saw that once again on Tuesday night. Not very good. Frankly, bad in 2 of his 3 starts. His other start was okay, but it's got a strikeout to walk ratio 7-7. It's at some point in time, and we knew when the Orioles acquired him from the Marlins that there clearly was an upside play here from a long-term standpoint. 2 more years of club control. This is a guy who was an all-star as a rookie and looked like he was going to be a really good pitcher, but clearly has been on the decline the last couple of years, has had some injuries the last couple of years that's contributed to that. But this was clearly one of those where you say, okay, back half of the rotation guy, and maybe there's some upside to unlock at some point, and maybe it's next spring, right? It's not necessarily someone you're going to fix on the fly, but he's been bad. Let's just call it what it is. He's not been good. He has a 7.53 ERA in his 3 starts since joining the Orioles. That's not even close to good enough. But then you get into the bullpen, and we saw this on Tuesday night, albeit in a game they were trailing, so you're not going to burn your best relievers. But who do you trust in the bullpen right now? Yennier Cano, check. Sir Anthony Dominguez, check. Those two I feel really good about at the moment. But
Well, if you're losing more often, you get a chance to throw Soto out there.
yeah, and Brendan Hyde even said it after the game, and I would have to agree. And again, it's a very low bar based on that performance, but Gregory Soto threw a scoreless inning. That was one of the few positives you could say. I mean, at some point in time, when you're talking about Soto, when you're talking about Craig Kimbrell, and Hyde talked about it at length before Tuesday's game. He's talked about this. I've said this over and over and over. As much as people want to crush his bullpen usage and things, he can't pitch the same two guys in every spot every day. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. They need to find some more productivity, some more, you know, a couple more guys that you can trust. And right now, you look at the makeup of their bullpen, you feel great about Cano and Dominguez, but Kimbrell, we've talked about that. Soto, you just mentioned. Brian Baker comes in and gives up 2 more runs in the 6th inning. Birch Smith had a good run there. I still more good than bad, but it's Birch Smith. Do we have any level of trust in him at this point in time? Cionel Perez has been up and down. Keegan Aiken was just in the minor leagues recently, and at best up and down. So, I mean, I just reeled off all the names in their current bullpen, and yes, that's working under the assumption that
Nothing
Danny
in there
Coulombe,
smells like Andrew Miller.
well, of course not. I'm not expecting Andrew Miller, but it's got to be better than what it is, right? I mean, it's got to be at least where it was earlier in the year, where we kept saying, okay, bullpen needs improvements, but statistically it had still done a good job. You look at where the Orioles stand since July 1st, and this is rotation and bullpen put together, their total pitching staff, they're bottom 5 in ERA since the beginning of July. Now, I don't think that's a big surprise based on anyone who's watched, but it speaks to we're going on a month and a half, 2 months where the pitching has been that big of a problem. And, the offense, inconsistent, still way better overall than the pitching, but has been inconsistent. And you've had some individuals who haven't really hit the ball, at least with power, for quite a while now. I came across this on social media on Tuesday night during the game, Nestor, but Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Ryan O'Hearn, Ryan Mountcastle each have 1 home run since the All-Star break. The All-Star break was about a month ago, right? Now, Gunnar Henderson overall offensive profile has still been good. Just the home runs have evaporated. He's still hitting for average, doubles, all that.
All Holiday hits your home runs. Meanwhile.
Right, exactly. But Mountcastle, the power has disappeared. O'Hearn, haven't seen as much power from him. We've talked about Adley Rutschman, and even though he's been better to start August, we know what kind of a nightmare July he had. So overall, let's be clear, the offense isn't nearly as problematic or concerning as the pitching. But as I've said to you, and I will continue to say it, if this team is going to make noise in October, their offense needs to be at the best version of itself, and we haven't seen that. So Tuesday, pretty easy to kind of look at that performance overall and say, well, yeah, they didn't pitch, they didn't hit, they didn't field particularly well in a couple situations that hurt them, and they lost going away 9-3. So, it is what it is. You don't want to make too much of one loss, but this is a team that they haven't won 3 straight since late June. Now, they haven't lost 3 straight since July 21st through the 24th, but this is where they've been, very middling. I think you said it the other day, they felt much more like a 500-ish kind of team for a long time now, and the numbers support that. So,
well, I would go back to the Cardinals, the weekend with the Cardinals. From that point forward, we were talking about, they hadn't been swept, all that kind of stuff. And they've been a diminished team via bodies, right? Like, I mean, we're going back to a time where Means and Bradish were still like in the conversation to be part of this thing. So it's been a little while. I saw the injuries up on the screen. Over the weekend, there was a screenshot and it wound up out on Twitter and just a whole list of them. It's impressive enough to say this young swashbuckling team that was on pace to win 105 games again isn't going to. And much like we have football seasons around here where Lamar gets hurt in October, November, and things fall apart, it hasn't been like Lamar, but you start losing 3-4 pitchers, you start losing 2-3 position players, you start taking you have Jordan Westberg out and trying to move guys around and replace those at bats with Ramon Arias, and you got young people all over the place, really. I mean, guys that we talk about Henderson and Rutschman and these guys. They feel like veteran guys. They
Mm.
played 3 playoff games. They've been here for 2 summers. Yeah, they're very new to this, and they played so well for so long, going back to 2 years ago, really the last month or two of the 22 season, all of last year, where I mean, there was no stop sign. They never got swept. They weren't losing series. That's how you win 101 games. Then they come out April and May. It looks the same way. And they had a cavalry coming over the hill for pitching, and things were going to get better. And, uh, you know, the disappointment of it is that the Orioles have never won in 30 years. And you start to believe they can be elite. Dude, I sit here 6 weeks out on the playoffs and say they are what they are right now, and they're not going to look and smell as good as they did in May. They might win the World Series, but I don't think they're going to play 700 ball for 3 weeks at any point here the next 6 weeks to sort of go on one of those 10 and 2s or 15 and 6s, or something that really shows them to have come back to life, because that's going to take the bottom end of the rotation. That's going to take or it's going to take some system where they hit the ball while they pitch poorly and they're winning games 9-6 and we don't notice. We're not sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves the next day. We're going to say, well, Rogers gave him 5 innings and 5 runs and it was okay because Henderson hit 2 home runs and, drove in 6, because that's how they're going to win games. And when they don't, we're going to have our feelings hurt the next morning. And when you give up 5-6 runs a game, you're going to, even if you're good, you're going to lose half of them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the pitching's a concern, and when I've talked about the offense needing to do the heavy lifting, Tuesday's not the greatest example of that because you give up 9. I mean, I'm not expecting the offense to score 10 every night, right? I mean, we're not talking about something that's completely unreasonable. But you look at that game, it was 5-2 in the middle of the game. You only have 2 runs at that point. If it's 5-4 there, if it's 5-5, then who knows how the rest of the game plays out, right? But you're not scoring runs in that spot. We talked about that on Sunday, the game down in Tampa or St. Petersburg, where you had a 1-0, you scored 1 run. You can question Brandon Hyde taking out Suarez or putting in. You still had to get 6 more outs or 7 more outs at that point. You scored 1 run. Winning 1-0 is not a formula that's going to turn out your way very often, if that's what it's going to take to win a baseball game. So, I mean, it's just collectively they have to pick it up. And you said it. Is this team capable of going 9-2 over an 11-game stretch? Sure. I mean, even bad teams can have a stretch like that from time to time. But to your point, in terms of going on a tear, right, where you would win, you'd go 15-3, something like that. I don't know. I mean,
all they have to do in October is go 2-1, 3-2, and 4-3.
And I want to continue.
Really?
Sure, you're absolutely right. And even the factoid that I just threw out there, how they haven't won 3 straight since the Texas series in late June. Well, if you go 2-1, 2-1, 2-1, 2-1, 2, you get the point. That's 667 ball over the long haul. That's really good. So you don't need to have this amazing stretch, but they certainly have to find some more consistency. I mean, there's no question about that. However, and you alluded to it because you made your comment that they could still win the World Series. Tell me who the elite team is in the AL right now. At times it's looked like Cleveland. Earlier in the year, it looked like the Yankees. It looked like the Orioles for a time. The Astros
waiting for one of these teams like the Red Sox that are 8 back to get 3 back because they get hot. I'm saying, all right, none of the good teams are hot. Where's second place and third place? Somebody out there in August should be going on a 13-5 tear at some point and hasn't. And maybe the Orioles are that team. The Orioles have been mediocre for 2 months. They'd have to get better pitching to do that, and certainly they need to get better hitting. And I think the hitting is starting to really concern me, where I thought, well, the pitching's always going to be shaky. We've been talking about the pitching for 8 months. We've been talking about the pitching since they didn't replace Bautista correctly, right? I don't know that correctly is the right word, because Hader was the only guy out there and they didn't want to give him that money and he wouldn't have been replacing. So it's almost impossible to replace what Bautista was last year because you can't count on anything that good. Even if you got Eckersley in his prime, I don't know that you'd say, well, that was last year. That wasn't this year. to be able to do that. But the hitting part of this was so consistent for so long. They're missing some parts of the lineup. I think there's some adjustment going on. And I know every day they work on this, but offing at bad pitches, not swinging at their pitch, striking out a lot, weird umpiring just in general. Like, I've been paying attention to the strike zone the last couple months. And maybe it's the box that's out there, and they've had that box up for a long,
That's
long
part of it.
time. But the strike zone's been very inconsistent on various nights for hitters.
It has been, and I I said this during the Cleveland series. I said this after another recent game. Yeah, I become more and more in favor of the automated strike zone coming at some point here in the not too distant future. But that point aside, I guess for me, I'm not as concerned about the offense looking at it through the lens of you're healthier on offense. You're missing Jordan Westberg, and that's a big loss. I mean, that's hurt, but that's one guy. If you look at the rotation, they're missing Kyle Bradish. They're missing Grayson Rodriguez. They're missing John Means. They're missing Tyler Wells' rotation or bullpen, however he would have factored in there. I mean, Grayson
Every time Brian
Rodriguez.
Baker gets the ball, realize it's plan 5, plan
Sure,
6.
sure. And since you mentioned Brian Baker, I mean, the one thing I'll push back on a little bit on the Batista thing. Yes, you're not going to do 1-for-1, but I said this going back to the offseason. I said this even in spring training. They needed to do more in the aggregate with their bullpen to try to replace Felix Batista, right? I mean, Craig Kimbrell coming in and just saying, okay, well, Yennier Cano, you still have him. Well, Yennier Cano was part of the bullpen the year before. So, look, if there's something that I think is a very valid, fair criticism of Mike Elias, who has done so much tremendous work to get the Orioles to this point in time, and specifically where they were last year when we saw winning 101 games, best record in the AL. I would say it looks like they need to reassess what they invest in their bullpen. I think that's an area that they do need to invest more. And when I say invest more, that doesn't mean
Well, they're not growing the arms right now. They really aren't.
I mean, they fixed arms. They fixed arms. I mean, Yennier Cano is a great example of that. Jacob Webb was an example of that. Someone who was a waiver claim. Someone they got. The Angels gave him away last year, and he turned into what he had been this year for them, and hopefully he's able to come back. But
that's its own dumpster dive, right? When teams are getting rid of guys and you're taking them on, there's a whole no wonder it didn't work when it doesn't work.
Exactly. And they've had their share of guys that are waiver claims, and then those guys are gone in a week or two, right? I mean, and every team has that, right? I mean, let's be clear, that's not just an Orioles thing. But if there's one criticism of Mike Elias, and this goes back to last year when we were talking about the bullpen needing more, even long before Felix Bautista went down, when Fuji was literally the only addition they made to their bullpen before the trade deadline. So if there's one criticism I have of Elias, it would be that. I think they need to start investing a few more resources into their bullpen. And when I say that, that doesn't mean give Josh Hader a $100 million contract either. But there's a wide range of ways you can do that in terms of making trades and making some middle of the road signings, things of that nature, to try to fortify that. But that's not going to help you in the moment. The saving grace is you look at the rest of the AL, and I mean, the Yankees are back in first place as you and I are speaking in real time. We'll see what that looks like over the next week or the next few days until you and I get together again. But
what do you make of the Red Sox this weekend coming in? What do you think of them?
I don't think very much. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're 8 games over 500. They had the really good run back in late June into early July that got them into the All-Star break, and they've been pretty mediocre since then, right?
So is everybody else, right?
Yeah. So
they got within a spit of New York and Baltimore, and then they've been sort of stalled out.
They clearly have been way better than guys like me thought they would. Thought they were going to be this year. I thought they'd be in last place. I thought they were clearly lacking. Thought they had a very strange offseason. But
so did Dan Shaughnessy when I had him on this week, by the way.
Some of the pitching that they signed ended up not being healthy. Their pitching has really fallen off. You look at their runs allowed. I mean, they're kind of hovering right around where the Blue Jays are in terms of runs allowed. So I think they're what they are. They're decent. They're a wild card contender. Do I think they're seriously going to challenge the Orioles and Yankees, the combination of the Orioles and the Yankees the rest of the way? I have a tough time believing that. But we're getting closer and closer to, we're at what, 100? Orioles are 70 and 50 after this series opening loss against Washington. Got a quarter of the season to go. I mean, we're getting close to sprint time at this point. So to your point, whether you feel like the Orioles can go on a 15-2 kind of run or not, we're getting close to the point in time in the season where one team does that. That could be the difference right there of that team having home field or winning their division or what have you. So we are in that territory. I mean, certainly the Orioles need to, they need to play better than what we've seen. If you want to take 3 out of 4 from the Red Sox, I mean, they're not saying the Red Sox are going to come in and just lie down, but certainly, this is a Red Sox team that did some heavy lifting to get back in the race right before the All-Star break, and they were kind of the proverbial team that it kind of felt like they didn't want to stop playing at that point in time, and they've had a tough time really getting themselves going again. I mean, not all bad, but that's the issue you have when you're one of those teams that gets off to a bad start. And the Astros, even though they're in the midst of a winning streak right now, they've dealt with that a little bit. You have to exhaust so much energy. You have to play so well just to get yourself back to that point where you say, okay, we're in it. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, we need to continue to play really well now moving forward. And
like Jackson Holliday's batting average. He had to come a long way to get to 170.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good example. And I saw, before he had the single on Tuesday night, I saw that what his most recent run at the plate had been. His only hits had been home runs over the last.
Kobe Mayo's going to have to go 6 for 8 to get his average up to 212. At some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, that doesn't mean it's impossible for those teams, but the Astros are a good example of that. And look, the Astros have taken first place in the West. It still might end up being that team, although you look at some of their injuries and you look at them and say, can they really put it together the way they need to?
Well, your point is there's no great team. There's no New England Patriots or Kansas City Chiefs we're staring at here.
Yeah, I mean, okay, Cleveland's back on track, but there's still, there's questions about, I mean, as much as you love their bullpen, there's some questions about their rotation. I mean, there are certainly some questions about their offense compared to the other top offenses anyway. Don't get me wrong, I like Cleveland a lot, but do I think they're necessarily a juggernaut? Is their pitching, is their reliance on their bullpen? You look how many, people have talked about how Brandon Hyde uses a bullpen. Look how many innings their bullpen's thrown. I mean, it's a question. It's the strength of their team, obviously, but is that going to hold up to that degree, to that extent, when you've got 2+ months to go if you're playing deep into October? So that's
and that exactly only really becomes intimidating in October if you have a lead.
Sure, no question about it. So look, I mean, Cleveland, they're back to having the best record in the AL. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Cleveland, but there's not a single team with a 600 winning percentage in the American League right now. I mean, there's no one.
If you would have told me in June that they were going to lose all these players, I mean, there's that's going to be the shame of all of this, is this incomplete grade if they don't win the World Series, right? Like, whatever happens for their wins, what their record is, all of that, we'll look back on this summer if they don't win the World Series and say, they were playing 625 ball until all their guys got hurt, and then they went down and played 550 ball, and they weren't good enough. I mean, I look at them right now, and I really do feel like what I'm seeing is not good enough. And part of that is because Mountcastle's not hitting the ball. Rutschman hasn't been hitting the ball. I don't believe in Mullins anymore. Santander's a guy we've all written off, and he's going to hit 50 home runs. So I said to you earlier this week, I believe Westberg's going to come back and play. So I think that's one piece. If I'm looking at all of them and saying game one of the World Series, game one of the playoffs, whatever that would mean, whether they win the division or not. And right now, I think it's hard to bet on them winning the division. So that, you would think they're going to play early on the way they've been playing lately, the way they've been trending. And they're not waiting on a pitcher to get here and get healthy next week. They're waiting on bats to wake up in some cases, right? They are what they are. I'm not expecting Soto to be brilliant or any of these guys to be brilliant, Rogers, any of these guys. But there is a point where you feel like the bats will wake up and they'll score 8 runs 3 out of 4 days this weekend against the Red Sox pitching, and they'll win 3 games because of that. I don't know. I need to see the bats reawaken a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And yes, in terms of upside for the remainder of the season, understanding that yes, you're optimistic that Grayson Rodriguez is coming back. You're optimistic that Coulombe's coming back. You're optimistic that Jacob Webb's coming back. So there is still some more upside to untap with the pitching. But I think as you look at the offense, again, you know me, I'm a huge Jordan Westburg guy. If I were just speaking as a fan, probably would be my favorite player. But he's one guy. They have other guys in their lineup that have not produced at the level we've seen them be capable of producing. And that's where you do have some it's frustrating in the moment, but if you're trying to project this out, again, this isn't about how the Orioles are playing on August 14th. This is about how are they going to be playing on September 14th? How are they going to be playing on September 28th? How are they going to be playing on October 5th? Hopefully. And I assume they're at least playing on October 5th, even if that's the end of the road, if it's a quick exit. But, they're going to make the playoffs. I still feel very confident about that, whether it's as a wild card uh, or beating out the Yankees. But yeah, if you're looking for upside, if you're looking for what can get better for this team, yeah, they do have some pitchers that you're still hopeful and optimistic are coming back. But offensively, even putting aside Jordan Westburg, even if we just pretended that we found out Jordan Westburg has some kind of setback, they find out the bone's not healing quite as well as they had hoped, and he doesn't come back, you still have the rest of your lineup intact. And that's where you look at this and say, okay, maybe I'm not as optimistic about Cedric Mullins because it's kind of been 2 years that have kind of trended in this direction now. But I have to feel optimistic that Adley Rutschman is going to get going. And we've seen him be better in August than he's been in July. And we'll see how that plays out. You have to be optimistic that Gunnar Henderson, who was on a 55 home run pace back in June, is going to start hitting the long ball again. And again, it's not like Gunner's been terrible at the plate. It's
Well, if
just
they don't hit it in October, they're going to lose at this point.
Sure. I mean, of course. And that's why I understand when people want to make these comments about their offense being too reliant on the home run and all of that. Look, there are times where you want to see guys move a runner over. There are times where a sacrifice fly is good enough. Absolutely. But I'll continue to say, look how many home runs the Texas Rangers hit in October last year. If this team's going to play deep in October, it's going to be their offense getting hot and yes, hitting a lot of home runs. So they have the capability of doing that. And it begins with Anthony Santander and Gunnar Henderson. And you're hoping Jackson Holliday continues to grow more and more comfortable, more and more consistent, and he can be a factor. Certainly the guys that I mentioned as far as, Mountcastle and Rutschman and O'Hearn and of course Gunnar Henderson. So, I just rattled off 7 guys there, right? I mean, this is, as I've said, say what you want about Mullins at the very bottom or Ramon Arias at the moment at the very bottom of the lineup, but even the really good teams in baseball generally have 1 or 2 guys at the bottom of their lineup that don't hit. I mean, it's kind of where it is. It's a very have and have not kind of sport offensively at this point. For all the guys having good seasons, you'll see even guys that you thought were good players having really, really bad seasons. So,
well, it just pisses me off. We got runners on second and third, and all you need to hit a fly ball, and they can't do it.
Gotcha.
And you're behind by a couple of runs. That's situational hitting that's very frustrating to me at this point from this team because I expect more from them.
That's
and
fair.
I think part of that is that they have been good for 2 years. It's nut cut time now, and they're chasing down the Yankees. It's a little bit different than last year, and all of this is going to look and feel different over the next 6 weeks because we're more accustomed to the pressure of this, and we've been through 2 years ago now, last year. And this level of expectation of having them have seen them play so well for months at a time that we're now into the second month of them not playing well, and I'm starting to think they are what they are from a Bill Parcells standpoint of saying, well, what did you think was going to happen if they didn't have Bradish and if they don't have Grayson Rodriguez? I mean, even 2 weeks ago we were like, well, at least Grayson's all right. The minute that went bad, I sensed your countenance to change about where their ceiling could be.
Sure. And look, that ceiling is still hypothetically there. If you do get Grayson Rodriguez back the 3rd week of September, and look, maybe it's a little earlier than that. I don't know. I mean, Elias made comments down in St. Petersburg over the weekend where he said, but he acknowledged it's not going to be Labor Day, right? I mean, it's going to be a little bit deeper into September, but if you can get him back where he can at least make a couple starts and it looks like Grayson Rodriguez, there you go. Same with Danny Coulomb, right? Gets back on the mound and gets back in the major league bullpen and looks like Danny Coulomb. Same with Jacob Webb. So it's not as though that upside is not there, but it's not guaranteed. And as they're presently constructed, it is much more difficult looking at this team's path to playing deep in October in that way, unless their offense is just firing on all cylinders and they're doing what we've seen them do in the past, right? And to your point about moving runners or guys on second and third, sack flies, all those different things. And I hear that. At the same time, I'll continue to say, who are the teams that do that all the time? Because the Orioles have the second most runs in the American League right now. So if
well,
all
when they
these
were
other
doing
teams,
it, they were playing 600 ball. When
right,
they were doing
exactly.
it more consistent.
No, I understand. But even, and I made reference to the fact that their ERA's bottom 5 in baseball since July 1st. Their offense since July 1st. Now, it's not the best, and there's certainly holes that you can poke in it in terms of inconsistency, but their offense is still really high up there overall, but it has been more inconsistent. It has been more frustrating. Individuals, and this is where you give credit to Santander. You give credit to what Colton Cowser's done over the last 3.5 weeks or so, where he's been, maybe their best player overall when you look at the overall profile. But those
he had
guys,
a rough at bat on Tuesday night,
yeah,
too.
and look, I mean, everyone's going to have rough at bats. I mean, everyone's going to have an offer. I mean, we understand that it's baseball, but it's been Santander and Cowser and Holiday. Those have been the guys that have been carrying them a little bit more. Whereas, and Gunner's hit for average, but we haven't seen him hit the home runs. We've talked about Rutschman. Mountcastle hasn't hit for power in 2+ months, really. So, you're just waiting for some of these guys to wake up. But to your point on the pitching side, I can vividly remember having this conversation with I think it was even just a few of my friends. It wasn't even on social media or you and I talking on the radio. And they were talking about the Ravens defense back in 21, late in the season. And I said, you don't have Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey out there. You have Kevon Seymour and Daryl Worley playing corner. What do you think's going to happen in that spot? And this is where
against Joe Burrow, against Patrick Mahomes.
Right, and this is where I stood up for Wink Martindale at the time a little bit, who was ultimately let go. And look, I mean, Wink had times where he had Chris Westry on an island play, against the Bears in that game where Lamar was sick. It's like, yeah, probably need to adjust your coaching style too, and that's why Wink isn't here anymore. But the point is, you can talk about your depth all you want, and look, and depth is important. Make no mistake on that. Albert Suarez is a great example of this. Albert Suarez began the year in the minor leagues. Feels like an eternity ago, but he did. But you only have so much depth, and you can only say next man up so many times if you keep enduring those injuries, and then you just get to a point where not making excuses for them. It's more so my expectations being lowered, not that they've, that they're crying the blues or want anyone to feel sorry for them. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Trevor Rogers was available, right? I mean, there's a reason why the Phillies were so willing to give up Gregory Soto. And now Sir Anthony Dominguez has pitched really well for the Orioles and has looked more like the Dominguez.
First place team sent them 2 relief pitchers on the trading deadline. And I can't believe anybody woke up thinking like, well, that's a real plus because if they're willing to give them up because they needed depth too. I guess in the case of the Phillies, they wanted Hayes' bat, right? They
did. And, but I would also say, well, Phillies haven't been so hot looking at how they've played. So, I mean, there's a lot of parity/mediocrity going on in baseball right now, even amongst the teams that played so well in April and May and June. It's just the truth. And
some fatigue in August.
And yeah, but at the same time, everyone's dealing with that, right? So the teams that might not have as much depth, like the Orioles, who their injuries have just crushed any depth that they did have, yeah, they're going to feel it on the field that they're not playing well. So I'm not saying that to say that it's okay. It's where it is right now. So that's where I've said over and over, if they're going to get where they need to go, they need their offense to pick it up, because I certainly have more faith in Adley Rutschman picking it up offensively and Gunnar Henderson picking it up offensively, and Ryan O'Hearn, who's done it for 2 years now, to hit for a little more power than we've seen of late. And Ryan Mountcastle, same with him, We know he can get hot for 3 weeks and carry a team. Uh, Westberg coming back. I have more faith there than I do in looking at the current state of the bullpen and saying, all right, I trust two guys. I hope Jacob Webb's coming back. I hope Danny Coulombe's coming back. I hope they look like themselves when they come back. I'll buy that. I'll even buy that Craig Kimbrell gets himself straightened out at least for some period of time. But I don't know. I mean, again, you look at that pen, and I've said it. You need 4 or 5 guys that are pitching at a high level for October. Like that's the
There's
minimum.
nothing in there that feels like prosperity in a big way. And the Soto and Dominguez thing, just because they were somebody else's players, I think we did look at them and they've had success. We'd look and say, can you recapture
Sure.
that? Can you bring
and,
that back?
And I
that is who Elias is. In the same way that I've said the other day, Brian Billick thought he could rehabilitate Terrell Owens. That's Elias thinks he can. He remembers a pitcher flashing 4 years ago and when he was going to draft him, remembers the guy, followed him, liked him, and grabs him. He grabs guys he likes. I think we've learned that, O'Hearn, different guys that he looked at and said, I like that kid. Bring him over here. We'll teach him our way of doing things, and we'll straighten him out. We'll maximize his potential.
Yeah. And look, that could still happen. First of all, again, Sir Anthony Dominguez has been their best reliever, with Cano since he arrived. I know it's only been a couple
It's kind
weeks.
of amazing. Like when I see him, I'm like, why did Phillies give him up? That's what I look at and say, he's too good to give away in July, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I said, go look at his postseason numbers. When they made it to the World Series 2 years ago, he was really good for them. He's pitched in October, and he's pitched well in October. So they wanted, but to your point, they wanted Austin Hayes. So look, a month from now, we could be having a very different conversation about Gregory Soto and Craig Kimbrell. I hope we are, because again, if this continues, if the bullpen continues the way it's going, they're going to continue to lose games unless they're scoring 8 runs, because you don't trust that they're going to be able to hold a lead. So, but you're hoping that they get on track. You're hoping that a couple guys that that are still able to come back from injury are able to do that. And hope Coulombe looks like Coulombe and Webb looks like Webb. And this could be a very different team with a very different feeling come the 3rd week of September. But mid-August, it's hard to feel great about it, other than the heavy lifting that they did over the first 2.5, 3 months of the season that put them in the position that they're in right now. They're 20 games over 500. They are still in excellent position from a mathematical standpoint because of what they did in April, May, and June. But at some point in time, you have to start projecting out what the rest of it's going to look like. And based on what we're seeing right now, that's where it's unsettling. It absolutely is. And that's probably the kindest word I could use to describe it. So they've got to pick it up. I think offensively, they're more than capable, because that's where they're much healthier, Westberg aside. But what we saw Tuesday night was the kind of performance we've seen too frequently over the last 6 weeks or so, which was didn't pitch, didn't hit, didn't feel particularly well. And yeah, even the Washington Nationals, who are a sub 500 team, are going to blow you out when you don't get any positive contributions other than another Santander home run.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He'll be monitoring baseball as well as football all weekend long. I am in Ocean City, Maryland. There's no Max Pizza there, Luke, but we'll make the most of it down there at the Ocean City Convention Center. We'll be at Mako all week long. Lots of dignitaries, celebrities, both of our sitting U.S. senators, Ben Cardin, as well as Chris Van Hollen, will be stopping by. That is an annual event for us. I'm sure I will run into the Honorable Governor Westmore, who's been ducking me. He knows he's been ducking me. And we're going to have Larry Hogan and Angela Alsobrooks also running for Senate later on in the month. Angela Alsobrooks will be joining us at State Fair. I'm wearing my State Fair shirt in Catonsville on September the 24th. We have 26 oysters in 26 days coming your way. It's kind of like Burger King. I have it my way every day for 26 days. We're going to do oysters in September because it has an R, and there's some oyster celebrations, including the second weekend of September down at Cooper's in Fells Point. We'll be broadcasting down there. I'm going to be starting the tour at Coco's on the 4th of September, which is Wednesday, and then on the 5th, we get going just like the Ravens get going against the Chiefs. Luke and I are going to talk some football around here through the weekend. The Atlanta Falcons come into town, and I'm sure we won't see Lamar or anybody else in this fake football extravaganza this weekend. Luke's at Owings Mills, Luke's at Camden Yards. We are doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery next Friday at Fadley's. The Cheat Stros come to town. I'll have the Gold Rush Sevens doublers to give away. Probably have some Ravens scratch-offs to give away as well. And the Maryland Crab Cake Tour also presented by our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, as well as Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping the water in my cup crystal clear. I put away my orange and purple colored glasses right now because I'm trying to see clearly as a real journalist. We got work to do around here. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.